Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Larry "The Rock" Zeidel was called the dirtiest player in hockey. A vicious, soulless maniac who instigated some of the most violent stick-swinging attacks in hockey history. His final act of on-ice mayhem, a gory bloodbath with Boston Bruins forward Eddie Shack, may be the event for which Zeidel is most remembered. But it was hardly his most egregious offense. In fact, it wasn't even his most brutal bout with Shack. But the Larry Zeidel story is more complicated than just a rap sheet of his reckless assaults. Was Zeidel a villain or a victim? What fueled the burning rage, the unrelenting hatred that Zeidel unleashed on bloodied and maimed opponents in a savage 20-year professional hockey career?
He was an animal, I tell you.
Lazarus Larry Zeidel was born in Montreal, Quebec in 1928 and raised in the gritty Park Extension neighborhood, a blue-collar district home to many immigrants. His was the only Jewish family in this neighborhood. Zeidel faced anti-Semitism as soon as he began school, as he was often assaulted by gangs simply because he was Jewish. He learned the only way to stop the torment was to beat up the bullies. The 6-foot, 190-pound Zeidel took his combative approach through minor hockey and advanced to the Quebec Aces of the Quebec Senior Hockey League, where he established himself as a solid, hard-hitting defender in 3 seasons. According to Zeidel, it was his stay in Quebec that shaped his belligerent style of play for the next 2 decades. Said Zeidel, "In Quebec we could play well and win, but the fans would rather have us involved in a real brawl and lose the game. There were a lot of rugged guys in the league at that time too, so maybe it was a matter of survival." In 1950, Zeidel and his equally ornery defense mate Bill Heindel Sr. were lured away from Quebec by the Saskatoon Quakers of the Western Senior Hockey League. After a year in Saskatoon and 43 AHL games in Indianapolis, Zeidel made his NHL debut during the 1951-52 seasons with the Detroit Red Wings. His start couldn't have been better. He immediately won a Stanley Cup with Detroit that year. Now, Larry also played a couple of games for Detroit the next season before being reassigned to the Edmonton Flyers for the remainder of the 1952-53 campaign. It was during this stint in Edmonton that Zeidel's penchant for bellicose behavior began to escalate. Easily, his most notorious act of violence occurred on January 30, 1953, at the Edmonton Gardens in a game versus Saskatoon. 5 minutes into the contest, Zeidel and Saskatoon's Jack Evans engaged in a horrific stick fight that was described this way. Quote, "The two of them went at it like medieval gladiators. First they broke their sticks by banging them on each other's heads. Then they carved at each other with the jagged stumps. Covered with blood, they began to trade punches. Finally, they wrestled each other to the ice exhausted. Later, Zeidel recalled, as we were being led from the ice, I noticed I was bleeding more than Evans. So I grabbed a loose stick and hit him over the head with it. Funny, but I remember holding back just a little bit as I hit him. If I hadn't restrained myself, he'd be dead." The Edmonton-Saskatoon rivalry resulted in more ugliness when in a later game, Zeidel was taunted with anti-Semitic slurs hurled by Saskatoon fans. Zeidel was sold to the Chicago Blackhawks in 1953 and played 1 full NHL season in 1953-54 before he was traded back to Detroit, who again assigned him to Edmonton for the 1954-55 season. Zeidel would now embark on a minor league odyssey that would last 13 consecutive seasons. Zeidel was apparently not thrilled with his demotion to Edmonton. It has been said that even his own teammates feared him. The Edmonton team was loaded with young future Hall of Famers like Johnny Busick, Norm Ullman, and Glenn Hall. But Zeidel wasn't in the mood for a learning curve. He reportedly said, You punks are playing with my playoff money, and you'll answer to me. Edmonton team owner Wild Bill Hunter recalled it was in these days that Zeidel would often be found screaming, crying, and pulling his hair out after a loss. Zeidel's wild temper was on full display in a 1955 game in Vancouver when he sucker punched Phil Maloney in the penalty box and was ejected from the game. Zeidel went berserk, refusing to leave the ice and challenging the entire Vancouver team to fight before being restrained by 8 police officers. The American Hockey League's Hershey Bears acquired Zeidel in 1955, and he provided the Bears with savvy and physical defense over 8 seasons, earning 2 Calder Cups and, of course, collecting a multitude of fines, suspensions, and even arrests along the way. Don Cherry was Zeidel's defense partner and roommate for 2 seasons in Hershey.
He was the most violent person, I think, outside of Connie Mad Dog Madigan. I remember one time I was playing on defense with him. I was his roommate too, great guy, but on the ice, and I was sitting in the penalty box, and he just carved up a guy named Gordy Hannigan. He had no, I don't know what the word is, but he'd carve you up as soon as you look at you. He never did anything to anybody that didn't do something to him or his teammates. He never just went out and did it to get the game going. And I remember he carved him up he couldn't believe it. And Gordy wouldn't go on the ice. That's the way it was back in those days. And I remember another time, a guy named Bo Alec. Bo Alec was a guy, kind of a smart aleck a little bit for Cleveland. And he'd come to the blue line, and now we're playing in Hershey, and he dumped the puck in. He'd say, "Go get it, Larry. Go get it, Larry." And there he'd go back and get it. So I went to one of their players, and I said, "Look, tell Bo not to fool around with this guy. This guy's going to carve him up if he keeps it up." Sure enough, he comes to the red line, dumps it in. "Go get it, Larry." He takes his stick, jams it in his face. Guy goes down, a pool of blood's around. Now all the guys come on, everybody comes on, and their teams are looking like that. And he skates around. You think somebody would have done something, but they were so terrified of him. He's skating around the outside. He said, "You go chase it, Bo. You go chase it."
On October 2nd, 1958, Zeidel and the Bears faced the New York Rangers in an exhibition match in Niagara Falls, Ontario. In the first period, Zeidel and rookie Eddie Shack engaged in a stick-swinging battle that left Zeidel with 10 stitches. Both players were ejected from the game. Undeterred, Zeidel later charged at Shack in the stands, setting off a full-scale riot involving fans and law enforcement. Zeidel, Shack, and another player were all arrested, with Zeidel facing charges of assaulting a police officer and creating a disturbance. It was more of the same in 1963, when Zeidel returned west as a Seattle totem. Among the lowlights of his 2-year stay in Seattle was a fine for spitting at a referee, and he was nearly banned from the league after a nasty stick fight with LA Blades forward Willie O'Ree. With his career nearing its end, Larry had become bitter about his fate as a career minor leaguer. He labeled his 8 years in Hershey as a dead-end street because the Bears were not affiliated with an NHL club. Zeidel returned to the AHL with the Cleveland Barons for 2 seasons. At the conclusion of the 66-67 season, Zeidel sent a career brochure and resume to all 12 teams in the newly expanded NHL. Former Edmonton Flyers teammates Bud Poyle and Keith Allen had taken the reins of the expansion Philadelphia Flyers, and they took a chance on the now 39-year-old Zeidel. Incredibly, after 13 long seasons in the minors, Larry Zeidel was back in the bigs, and he delivered with a +17 plus-minus rating in 67-68. Just as important, he became a mentor to his young defensive partner Joe Watson and helped calm the nerves of his roommate, young netminder Bernie Parent. Zeidel was intent on reforming his bad boy image, commenting that he was playing like a choir boy. But not everyone was convinced Zeidel could continue to squelch his predatory nature. Veteran hockey columnist Dick Beddos greeted Zeidel's attempt at rehabilitation this way. Mr. Zeidel is an excessively intense member of the Philadelphia Flyers. He has altered from an unschooled ogre to a literate werewolf, still anxious to drink the enemy's blood, preferably at room temperature. Beddoes proved to be right. The werewolf would return, and this time it was personal. On March 7, 1968, the Flyers were playing a neutral site home game in Toronto as the roof of the Philadelphia Spectrum was damaged in a storm. It was here on Maple Leaf Gardens ice that Zeidel and Boston's Eddie Shack would renew and dangerously escalate their 10-year rivalry. Moments after Zeidel leveled Shack with a cross-check, both players squared off in an ugly, stick-swinging brawl that left both men bloodied and bruised. Reminiscent of the 1958 incident with Shack, Zeidel then attempted to rip the Boston dressing room door off its hinges after both were ejected. NHL President Clarence Campbell suspended Shack for 3 games and Zeidel for 4. Clearly, Zeidel's attack wasn't just about settling past on-ice grudges. But what was it that caused him to become so unhinged? According to Zeidel, quote, "Nearly the whole Boston team tried to intimidate me about being the only Jewish player in the league. They said they wouldn't be satisfied until they put me in the gas chamber." However, Clarence Campbell denied reports that Zeidel had been subjected to anti-Semitic slurs prior to the duel with Shack, and Flyers owner Ed Snyder agreed, stating, quote, "Shack had nothing to do with any vicious name-calling, and reports of competitive baiting were blown far out of proportion." Zeidel also conceded that Eddie Shack made no anti-Semitic remarks. The Bruins also vehemently denied the charges. In fact, one Bruins player accused by Zeidel, forward Tommy Williams, was not even dressed for the game or sitting anywhere near the bench area. Bruins center Phil Esposito commented that just before the Shack-Zeidel altercation, he and Zeidel had bumped and had verbal exchanges. "I dropped my stick and said a couple of things to Zeidel," recalled Esposito. "But I didn't refer to his being Jewish. But I'll say this, he certainly referred to my Italian nationality." And finally, 2 fans in attendance that evening stated that Bruins players made offensive comments to Zeidel only after the stick-swinging altercation with Shack. Now, Zeidel returned to the Flyers for the 68-69 season, but was demoted after 9 games when veteran blue liner Alan Stanley was acquired from Toronto. The Rock's 20-year reign of terror was over. While riding the buses and staying in cheap hotels for 20 mostly minor league seasons, Zeidel saved and wisely invested his money, and in retirement he'd embark on a successful career as a stockbroker. But his story does not have a happy ending. Larry Zeidel vanished in a fog of unceasing headaches and tremors of rage. For decades after his tough guy hockey career, Larry Zeidel fell into a spiral of bizarre behavior and erratic actions. His marriage crumbled, and his family grew more and more distant. Later in life, he was at times homeless and frequently refused help. Larry Zeidel passed away on June 17, 2014, at the age of 86. But his hockey story still had one more important chapter. Upon his passing, Larry's family donated his brain to the Boston University CTE Center for Medical Research. It was determined that Zeidel's brain showed clear evidence of significant CTE. He likely suffered more than 100 concussions, according to the BU clinical report, and lost consciousness more than 10 times. Larry Zeidel died proud of the ferocious way he played hockey, because it was all he ever knew. But Zeidel died ignorant of the costs his reckless aggression would ultimately have on himself, and likely, his many victims.
Stanley Cup champ, 1952, right?
1952.
Detroit.
Undefeated.
Undefeated.
Defense. Undefeated.
Cool.
About 5 goals in 8 games, 4 shutouts.
That's cool, man.
You don't talk to them, you're playing them.
We hope you enjoyed this look back at the amazing life and career of Larry the Rock Zeidel. Click on the videos on your screen and subscribe for more classic hockey stories.